Welcome to today's session where we'll discuss increasing security, reducing risk, and maximizing government resources. I'm Steve Fail, Microsoft US Security CTO, and joining us for the discussion today are two of our state and local government security experts, Dean and Brian. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Dean Yacovelli. I'm the Director for Secure Enterprise for Microsoft State and Local Government customers. So I manage all the security technical specialists in our organization.
Hello, I'm Brian Hunt. I'm a Director Specialist for Modern Workplace and State and Local Government.
Thanks. Our discussion today will be in a panel format. And as we talk through many of the things that will help organizations increase security, we're also going to touch on many topics that cut across all the different examples that we have for state and local, federal, and that are applicable to the private sector as well. One of those topics that we'll touch on today is security operations modernization. When it comes to modernizing your SOC and when it comes to gaining efficiency throughout the operations of security, the key is really empowering your analysts and empowering security professionals, not trying to replace them. And so to have appropriate technology that meets that need is a primary goal of Microsoft as we help organizations address their security needs. Additionally, secure hybrid work is a new imperative and a new priority for Microsoft, realizing that customers, whether they're on premises, whether they're at home, whether they're traveling, need to have a great collaboration experience that is grounded with a foundation of security. And organizations need a roadmap and a plan to get there. So we recommend 3 phases, moving from identifying and monitoring to reducing risk, and finally to increasing protection. Additionally, insider risk mitigation is a topic that's top of mind for many organizations. As we've spent a lot of time and effort engineering technology and resources to focus on external threats, increasingly risks from internal mistakes and internal users is top of mind as an area that we need to prioritize additional investment. And throughout all of these activities, understanding how to connect the dots while simplifying the strategy is really key for organizations. Complexity itself can be an enemy to cybersecurity, so having a simplified strategy that addresses all of the primary needs of an organization can also reduce risk. Let's start off with a question for you, Dean. What challenges are top of mind for your customers right now?
I would say there's a couple of things. So number one, there is, and this is, you talk to any SOC operations leader, and they will tell you that, that one of the first things that they struggle with, one of the most important things is, well, overall, I would call it investigation quality. But it really also comes down to, so it's massive alert rates and alert fatigue as a result from, tier 1 SOC specialists. And essentially nets out to, and because investigations can take a day, 2 days, a week, and you can only conduct so many at a time. And so what you end up with is, and pick your report, low single-digit investigation rates. So let's call it 5%. I can investigate 5% of the alerts that I see on a daily basis. Now, first of all, as a set of outcomes, 5% is not generally considered across the board super spectacular, and yet it's what passes for success, unfortunately, in the SOC business, because of the state of overwhelm, because of the volume of data, et cetera. And it's also horrible for talent retention and morale for those folks, because basically your day is about deciding which 95% of the alerts that I look at should I ignore. That is not a fun game to go back into work for day after day after day. And so it's a talent retention problem. It's obviously an outcomes problem. I would say number 2, which kind of feeds into the problem number 1, is complexity, which is, as we know, the chief enemy of security. And so, and if you want to point fingers, I would say how we got here, a lot of it is, best of breed used to be the only game in town. For a long time it was. And it had its benefits, but I'll say from a complexity perspective, has not left us in a great place in terms of manageability, being able to manage, 20, 30 different security tools. And, there's too much data, too many alerts, easy to misconfigure these tools. And insights and coordinated response are really hard to come by as a result, because these tools essentially still don't talk to each other after 20, 30 years in the market. I would also say that there's a broader talent problem. So, even just in my space, I've sat down with, governors who were really proud of the fact, for example, that they had been forward thinking and funded 35 new, headcount for cybersecurity in their security operations center, and then really, really struggled with actually being able to hire people because it's so competitive. There's such a huge talent gap globally that, and keeping them is hard too, because, security analysts can command like mercenary level salaries right now, and they can stay 6 months and go make more money elsewhere. And so getting them so funding versus finding is also another challenge. And then finally, there are those who have tried to, get ahead of the curve and try to outsource some of their risk to managed security providers. And what they're finding, at least in the industry, in other industries probably as well, but in state and local government, they're finding that their compliance requirements actually complicate, or in some cases preclude, really the outsourcing of security, maybe not monitoring, but definitely security response. They're not letting you reach into their environment and do anything. So that complicates sort of the risk management piece. So that's sort of a lot of the top level sort of challenges that we see right now.
Brian, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, one of the things that we find out from doing post-breach or post-mortems after cyber incidents is that breach response is much slower than people anticipated. A lot of it has to do with basically being able to correlate and or use data across multiple systems and using human intelligence as a means of doing that correlation. Another piece that's a key factor is monitoring fatigue. A lot of that has to do with humans trying to actually correlate information across multiple systems or tools. The other part that we find is that bad actors will lots of times induce alerts or events to try to actually cause humans to ignore those events.
Those are great insights. Let's double click a little bit. I heard some recurring themes there around alerts and having too many alerts. Heard a little bit about analysts ignoring alerts, and that's not really through the fault of the analysts. It's about the systems that we've created. And so in many cases, we talked at the start about empowering security professionals. What does that look like? How do we begin to empower these security professionals that right now are up against a challenge of many alerts and having to choose which ones to chase and which ones to let go? What recommendations do you have, Dean?
So that's a great question. I would say, it really comes down to the end game, because, the nature of the cybersecurity problem is asymmetrical. So it's unlike a lot of other IT challenges, which basically means it's not a fair fight and it never will be. And it creates huge resourcing challenges for the defender. And so we have to do something a little bit different. And so, I've been on other panel discussions where I'm going to do it now. I'm going to just blurt out the fact that tier 1 SOC jobs are terrible. That's a soul crushing, position to be in on a day-to-day basis. And so really there's two pieces, right? We need to figure out the end game is to automate the boring and automate the essential as much as possible. And we need to, I think we're going to do this later, we need to define our terms very well and what we mean by automation. But I would say, and getting to automation, I think has 4 steps. Whoever you get it from, however you get to something that looks more like a platform, I think it's inarguable that there's 4 key components. Number 1, giant global real-time threat intelligence database in the cloud, right? None of those things are negotiable. Giant threat intel, real-time cloud, because that's the only place where that data can live. Number 2, having a giant database is not inherently an asset, right? You have to have we employ say 3,500 full-time people, and even if those people did nothing but parse the data in the giant database, it would take them 200 years to get their first insight. That's the scale of the data we're talking about, and so you really have to incorporate machine learning and AI to separate the signal from the noise at scale. That's the second piece. Let's call the first 2 the decision component. And number 3 and number 4 are the action component or execution. So basically, you have to be able to better integrate the different security components that you have for both for insight in terms of what is happening, turning alerts into an incident, which is a higher level analysis, and then coordination for response. With today's best of breed, it's really, really hard to do that. And then the fourth piece is when you have the first three, you have you have an execution a capability which allows you to automate a lot of the investigations that take so long, and the response that can take a long time and be kind of disjointed. And so rather than your analyst being able to chase down 1 or 2 or 3 alerts at a time, you can be doing 400 investigations, and instead of taking days, they take 90 seconds because of the input from ML and AI. And that is an absolutely game change in terms of the outcomes that we can begin to expect. So that's a lofty description, but yeah, I think it's the end game.
Yeah, and to add to that, one of the things that we found post-breach and post-mortem is that the attacks, the polymorphic attacks, or the attack rate at which customers are seeing bad actors come after their environment is at a rate that normal humans can't deal with, or they're happening in times when the quote unquote tier 1 SOCs are not staffed appropriately to do the hunting and the investigation. So the number one kind of learning from modern attacks is that you have to enable AI and ML as a means of both doing the hunting and the automatic response. Otherwise, humans won't be able to keep up with the attack rate.
Thanks. That's a great point. And as we look at automating the boring, automating the essential, the built-in automation and capabilities inside of Microsoft Threat Protection products are a huge way to accelerate your end goals with that. So getting started with built-in recommendations, getting started with built-in ML is a fantastic start for any organization. Some of the organizations that I've worked with, in one case, I had a public sector organization that had 2.6 million alerts that they hadn't responded to in the last 30 days. And that's just an insurmountable challenge. It doesn't matter how many people you staff, you can't overcome that type of challenge. And so as we look at things like saturation attacks, when we look at things like poorly tuned detections that are making life difficult for analysts, this is somewhere that having some built-in recommendations around best practices from data science teams and from specifically security teams that are doing data science. So they have that domain knowledge. And as Dean mentioned before, those 3,500 cybersecurity experts at Microsoft giving input into those models that we do create, custom built, purpose built for specific types of attacks and threats that we see in the wild. So definitely recommend that for organizations getting started, looking to streamline and modernize their security operations. Brian, next, let's go back to you. How is compliance and governance changing when you look at the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, governance and compliance is changing dramatically. With COVID, it's accelerated the work at home desire or need for our customers, and the ability to extend beyond the perimeter of what they're naturally used to defending has been a huge challenge. Beyond that, looking at ways of basically extending security protocols and governance to devices that may or may not be managed well, that normally set on an on-premise network, has become a strain or a little bit difficult challenge for our customers. Most are used to using traditional firewalls and or proxies that can actually investigate because the customer's endpoints are sitting on a network. With more and more people either using home devices or devices they're using from their home network, being able to investigate, do attestation, control, and governance for those devices and content has become extremely hard for them. And our tools are providing capabilities that reach out into those work at home environments and extending those firewalls and those security protocols to those endpoints.
Thanks, Brian. One of the patterns that I've seen with our customers as well, there's a particular customer in the financial services sector that I was talking with a few months ago, and they had done something really innovative around governance. They have a portion of their red team whose job it is to test all of the governance assumptions and all of the security controls that they have in place. And so this concept of verifying the things that you think are in place is just a fantastic concept. And we're actually moving a lot of that into our compliance and governance tooling as well. And so not every organization has a slice of a red team that's specifically tasked with the effort of testing all of the controls that organizations had put in place to ensure that they held up, because a firewall rule is only as good as it remains enabled, right? And so who's checking to see when it gets disabled? Or a specific content policy, or something around CJIS compliance, or looking at ITAR regulations. How do we check for these things in a more efficient way, since not every organization can have that type of team? And so building in more compliance and governance tools and policies into our first-party tooling enables customers to be able to just turn on those capabilities that they need. And now we have continuous monitoring, we have continuous governance. And in some cases where they're very tightly defined criteria, we can even do automatic enforcement. And so if we see a particular area of our technology stack that has fallen into non-compliance, that has violated a governance policy, we can start doing automated remediation. So the same things that can help us from an automation perspective when it comes to addressing external threats and those saturation attacks, we're saturated with policy requirements for compliance, with policy requirements and governance. So if we can introduce automation to those as well, it really helps to reduce risk for the organization. So let's spend a minute and just look at where the landscape is moving in terms of innovation. There is a lot going on at the endpoint, and the endpoint has received a lot of focus as we've seen people moving beyond the boundaries of the network perimeter, even more than they were before. And so, Dean, do you have any insights? What's happening at the endpoint right now?
So, I try to be data-driven in answering these questions, and the reality is there's a couple of things that are happening. I'd say pick your report, but 90+% of breaches start with a nasty email. That's the reality. So we have to think about the endpoint as the chief battleground and early detection response opportunity that we're going to get. Yes, you may have cloud-based filtering tools, but whatever gets past that and gets to a user's inbox for them to click on, that's where the first bad thing is going to happen. And so it's important that we have solid, EPP, sort of endpoint protection, investigation, and response capabilities. That's critical. But really, even if all that stuff fails, really where we need to get way smarter is on identity, because the reality is the traditional perimeter, firewall perimeters completely eroded at this point, and COVID did a great job of underlining that. And so identity has really become the new security boundary, right? The non-negotiable. And really what they're after when they're phishing you is your identity to lead to someone else's identity to lead to total control of the environment and the data in that environment. Beyond that, the biggest, so the folks on my team were working after hours, 6-7 days a week with customers when state and local governments first started sending their employees home. And in most cases, 70% of the PCs in state and local government are still desktops. So they didn't go home with hardware. They just went home with a need to work remotely. And so it introduced all kinds of new crazy work from home risk scenarios for all of these IT departments. And so we were working night and day with them, trying to provide recommendations. But I will tell you, by far and away, the number one nightmare scenario for all of these folks was exfiltration, or accidental or on purpose, of sensitive data to grandma's swampy home PC, and maybe having to manage grandma's swampy home PC now, which is its own kind of nightmare. So the recommendations, if we're at the recommendation stage that we were trying to give people, was basically sort of two-pronged. Number one, you got to be able to figure out what is sensitive in your environment. You got to know what that is, and let's keep it simple and say whatever you would use to flag stuff in your data loss prevention tools, probably a good starting point. And you can't just label new documents. You have to be able to go reach back and with the same criteria, retroactively label all the stuff in your file shares and stuff, because it doesn't stop being sensitive, and it's still a danger to be dropped onto a USB stick or dropped onto a unmanaged risky computer. So that's one piece, and rights protecting that stuff as well once you identify it. So labeling is nice, but encrypting is better. And the second piece, so that you have coverage across all scenarios and all device types, is a combination of a cloud application security tool to detect large downloads of data, etc., and other types of exfiltration, and then a mobile application management as differentiated from MDM. Device management, which is a huge political football in most IT organizations in terms of people not wanting, central IT to be able to wipe my whole device, et cetera, if I bought the device, that kind of thing. Whereas you can be more granular with application management and just identify, for example, managed apps. You just designate them, and then you can do things like block any exfiltration or cut and paste from a managed app on a mobile device, like a phone or an iPad or whatever, to a non-managed app like Dropbox or what have you. And that's another way that you can prevent that kind of data leakage that everybody's terrified of.
Yeah, great information, Dean. And one thing that we found doing investigations, specifically with the endpoint, is that pattern-based detection provides a first layer of perimeter protection on those endpoints, but it often fails. We've had multiple customers with really, really great pattern-based endpoint protection under polymorphic attacks, where it'll copy itself over and over again and make slight changes to a point to where the pattern no longer is recognized. And moving towards an anomalous policy detection is really the new minimum bar for security. And to also kind of cover off or tie up on what you were talking about in regards to information protection, with COVID and all the work at home strategies, the perimeter is amorphous. Being able to protect and have something that you can identify as being a perimeter, whether it's the desktop, the network, or anything else that would normally be protected through a firewall, has kind of faded away with work at home scenarios. Having your data safeguarded and having it encrypted and protected no matter where it lives has become a key means or a necessity for most of our customers. The walls that they're used to protecting have been broken down, and they're no longer there for them to enforce.
That's a great point, Brian. A lot of security investments traditionally in the threat and vulnerability management space, in the data loss prevention space, have been network centric. And so as we're looking at the endpoint, what a great opportunity with the new features in Defender ATP to be able to bring threat and vulnerability management to the device in near real time, regardless of where the device sits. We're no longer tied to the network to do those types of scans, and it's not periodic. It's all the time, and to be able to factor those risks in is definitely a huge benefit for organizations. And for data loss prevention to exist in the cloud, to exist on the endpoint in a cohesive manner, where we're not relying on network as the connective tissue there and doing our scans for traversal of data over the network, really gives us the full story and a unified approach across the board. So we talked about it a little bit earlier, but let's circle back around. The elephant in the room: what in the world is the role of AI when it comes to automation and security response? There's a lot of marketing out there. You'd be hard pressed to find some security marketing that doesn't include AI. So guys, just take a minute, give me the story. What's the real deal? Where does AI really help?
Yeah. So yeah, we talked a little bit earlier, kind of, what the promise of the improvement in outcomes is, but it may be useful to pause at this point and go back to basics and really spend a second or two talking about how do we define AI and how do we define, well, let's define automation more importantly. Some people, some customers I've talked to see it as, their analysts writing scripts in a orchestration tool to help components in their environment work better together. But honestly, And that's fine. That's one definition. It's not the definition we're talking about, because I don't believe that that definition really can help you scale, because again, human is at the center of it. And that's an inherent bottleneck with the rapidity and the complexity of the threats that are coming at you. There are new attacks and stuff coming so fast, you can't script that fast. And so to me, it's a dead end leading with that. And that really, it has to be led by ML and AI to reduce the human bottleneck impact. Again, it all comes back to scale. It's why we have to do all this in the cloud to iterate our tools and our defenses. But really, we have to try to move people out of the equation because of the asymmetrical nature of the problem and the arms race nature of the problem, which is that the attackers are starting to use ML and AI. And if you look at the definition of an arms race is you need to keep up. And so if you're not automating, you're not keeping up. And so you will never be able to throw bodies at this problem. That day is over. And so if you're not looking at ML or AI, you are falling further and further behind.
And Dean, I think to add on to that AI really does help augment that detection framework. And so giving you the flexibility, giving organizations the agility to have these tried and true detections. We ran into a lot of scenarios when usage characteristics changed of users now working from home. What looked like impossible travel 9 months ago isn't what impossible travel looks like today. So ensuring that you have agile AI that is able to keep up with changing data and look at both the short term and the long term for context. The way that we tackle this at Microsoft is with multiple AI models. So there is no one ring of the AI to rule them all. If there's one model that you're looking for to solve all of your problems or those types of things, that's a pursuit that just isn't grounded in reality. Really, it comes expertise from different teams, looking at different segments of data, tackling scenarios and challenges one at a time, and engineering very high quality detections, but maintaining openness and agility so that when the variables change, the AI models are kept up with as well. And so maintainability is key, having good data and good visibility across multiple domains. So one of the benefits of AI trained by Microsoft is that we have signals across our entire intelligence security graph that come from many different domains. And so when we're looking at what is the definition of risky or malicious, and we're defining these models that really characterize behavior, we have a much broader context to draw from than just net flow or just individual types of signals that products would have. Creating the bigger picture allows for a broader selection of features. And it's not AI for AI's sake, right? If we use AI and we come up with lots of fancy detections and they just generate more alerts for our analysts, we've just exacerbated the problem, right? So connecting that AI to the automation is key. Building a trustworthy detection is what it's all about. In some cases, you can do that with heuristics. It's easy. It's great. You put in a simple rule, it does the trick. Please don't use AI there, right? Just if it works, and run with it. And make sure that we're measuring how these detections are doing. And in places where we just can't keep up with that manual approach, the scripting skills, that's really where you need to look to tried and true AI models to come in, fill that gap, and allow you to increase the footprint of your automation. So we talked about automation being key, but having high quality detections is actually what enables it. So if you want to trust the automation, it starts with high quality detections, and there are some things you can only do that with AI. So that brings me to the next area that we should talk about, which is there's so much for organizations to tackle, from a strategic, protective, preventative perspective, from an incident response perspective. How do we measure and how should we showcase progress and results? So is it that we bought 5 new products? Is it that we received 1 million less spam messages this month? Is it that we blocked 1 million more spam messages this month? What really is that organizational rubric for success?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And I would say traditionally, measuring rates of actually preventing attacks is still a great measure. The challenge is for most of our CISOs and most of the folks dealing with cybersecurity threats today is there's a lot of unseen or unknown attacks. That's where the new tools and new capabilities around AI and ML, which you mentioned previously, come into play. So using those capabilities as a means to root out, hunt, and identify things that weren't being counted or seen before or previously are huge in today's market. Most of the customers that we engage with during breach identified that the tools they were using previously for measurement, for detection, were the things that were failing. So bringing in tools that can actually help do the hunting, do the analysis, and do it at a rate in which humans today can't keep up is really the new measure, or the new capabilities of providing that protection.
That's a great point, Brian. It's not about the detections themselves. It's about the delta, the changes. What new capabilities do we have? What are we detecting today that we couldn't have seen yesterday? Really great point there. Dean, let's toss it over to you to talk about the KPIs. Can we get this down to KPIs? What are those key indicators of organizational success?
So there's, a traditional SOC has tons of KPIs. I tend to try to, net stuff out, and we'll put everybody to sleep if we go through all of them. But I would say, the traditional stuff like mean time to recovery is super important, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That in terms of measuring our resiliency, I think increasingly a couple of things that we want to pay attention to is what % of my investigations was I able to automate and not involve a human in, because that, I think, is a directional indicator of the maturity that I'm introducing into my security operations center. I also think that it's important to look at how my analysts spend their time. Can I move them from the percentage of time spent on reactive investigations versus proactive hunting? That's also a really great indicator as that percentage move towards the proactive hunting. And if I can make a people-related point about Security Operations Center, we have kind of sidestepped maybe the best case, in case anybody thinks all this stuff is theoretical, we've kind of sidestepped maybe the best case study on earth for how this stuff actually works, because not surprisingly, given all the cloud, the huge cloud services we operate, Microsoft Security Operations Center is arguably the largest in the world and maybe the most complex. And what we found as we started to build something that looked more like a platform and then throw a cloud-based SIEM on top of that, what we found was because there's a lot of FUD around this, we did not reduce our staff. We simply doubled our capacity to address alerts with the same number of people. Nobody's firing cybersecurity people. You're an idiot if you do that. They are in short supply. So let's just nip that in the bud. So it really comes down to them being able to do more with the same amount of bandwidth. And what we found was we saw a 70% reduction in our use of third-party tools. We used to look exactly like our customers, right? Basically a ton of third-party tools, throw a SIM in front of it and cross your fingers. And now we are finding that we saw a 70% reduction in our spend on third-party tools, and that we handle twice as many alerts with the same number of people. And it freed our people up to do proactive hunting, basically stuff that used to be above their pay grade because they didn't have the time to get good at it and stuff, because they were always on their back foot. And so now essentially you're up-leveling your employees. That's a talent retention consideration, a positive one. And so to me, there's a lot of goodness beyond sort of the metrics in just how many alerts can we handle with the same number of people, that kind of stuff. So those may be kind of more high level than a SOC operations person would talk about, but I think they're very meaningful.
That's great. As we undergo the SOC transformation, making sure we're measuring the right things, not things that are attacker controlled, but things that our SOC can reliably engineer. And as we up-level the experience of our analysts through bringing great visualization, doing visual hunting, bringing AI and ML to give better alerts and more context to the issues that are happening so that less expertise is required. We're helping to fill the talent gap, and we're also investing in the organization's security profile and reducing risk. So we can see those impacts across a number of very practical areas. How long is it taking us to acknowledge that there are particular alerts? What percentage of alerts are we ignoring? is a great one to understand how can the SOC scale. What does that mean time to remediation? Is automation helping us to close things out faster? Is it helping us to implement self-healing? So one of the differentiators of the Microsoft platform is that we don't just look to automation as something that is applied very broadly, but in a very targeted way to have a built-in playbook that understands the workload that is involved in the detection and understands what good looks like for the entity that's been compromised or is at risk. And we define self-healing as the ability to go from the compromised state back to good. And so having workload awareness, having tooling that's aware of the types of detections, the type of data that are flowing through it and custom built for that type of data gives you the confidence to be able to apply the right playbook at the right time and to achieve self-healing. So increasingly, you'll see features inside of Microsoft products that have that term self-healing. It's really beyond automation because of the quality of the signal and the level of awareness that we have both around the workload that's sending the data and the entities involved that we need to mitigate the risk with. Some other key things you can track SOC efficiency with are your sensitive information labeling percentages. What percentage of our data has some kind of label on it? Even if the labels aren't 100% accurate 100% of the time, we can look at aggregate data flows and use it to inform the context on an incident response. If I have a laptop that has a cyber incident on it, maybe some malware on that particular laptop, and I'm looking to respond between, let's say we have two laptops, both have malware on them. One of them has a gig's worth of sensitive information on it, and the other one is rarely used. Which one am I going to investigate first? Where's my priority? So as analysts have to make those tough decisions about what is the right asset to look after. Anything we can auto remediate and auto heal for them is a plus because we're going to give them scale and help them achieve their goals. And then prioritization on top of that to say, if you are going to look at a handful of things, what are the ones that really need the attention? And those are some areas that the Microsoft tooling really shines. So let's take a step back and review. How can Microsoft help your security operations? Well, when it comes to security operations modernization, Microsoft is ensuring that we're empowering analysts, not trying to get rid of them. And in this case, technology is the tool that you can use, whether it's the self-healing, the automation, the AI and ML alerts for better detections. Those are things that we are investing in to give analysts a cleaner pane of glass so that they're not coming in with a lot of distractions and a lot of questions and arbitrary prioritization. We want them to know exactly where their expertise can be utilized with the most effect. We're helping organizations secure their hybrid work, building on zero trust principles across 6 pillars. We're not just looking at zero trust network. We're not just looking at zero trust identity. Microsoft really takes a look across 6 different pillars of security to help organizations achieve zero trust. In our federal space, that's somewhere we've seen a lot of priority and a lot of movement over the last few months with NIST coming out with new zero trust guidance. And this is somewhere that Microsoft internally has transformed and is investing heavily to make sure that our customers can transform as well and realize those zero trust principles in order to build their secure hybrid work environment. And finally, insider threat and risk management. The most difficult detections have to do with insiders, things that look benign, things that would be benign in most of cases. But when you take a look across many, many incidents, when you take a look across the entities and many behaviors, you start to see patterns that are problematic. And in these cases, you can get the right individual's attention on it at the right time to mitigate the risk to the organization. Thank you, Dean and Brian, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that this discussion has given you fresh security insights and strategies to help your organization improve your security posture, reduce risk, and optimize your resources.